Chapter 39. Even though I've come all the way here, it looks like I'll be leaving without getting the chance to have a good talk with you. Gilead apologized after he personally found his way to Eugene's room in the early hours of the morning. Expecting this turn of events, Eugene had woken up early and had been waiting for Gilead's arrival. It's all right, Eugene dismissed. After all, it hasn't even been that long since I left. Gilead refuted him. Since it's already been 2 months, you could say that it's been quite a long time. Gilead appeared tired. It might be just because of his current mood, but he looked like he had aged by a few years since Eugene had last seen him. Hesitantly, Gilead revealed, "You it is. It's been decided that he'll be accompanying Tanis to her family's estate. So he won't be returning to the main estate?" Eugene confirmed. "He'll be returning for a short while, but he'll be leaving immediately afterward to go to his maternal relatives. Understandable why she's doing this. If he just stays at the main estate, it will be difficult for him in many ways," Gilead muttered as he looked out the window. "Of course, I don't even have the slightest intention of blaming you since you've done nothing wrong. I think I might be considered to have done wrong by beating up my older brother," Eugene confessed. "If all you did was hit him, then he got off lightly." Though Gilead said this as if it was a joke, he didn't sound as amused as one might expect. "Tanis' family resides in Kiel Empire's Bossar fief. The ruler of that fief, Count Bossar, is my father-in-law. Since it's a quiet and peaceful place, it will be a good place for Tanis and Euad's hearts to recover." "Are you worried that they might bear a grudge?" Eugene asked. "I'm only human after all, so of course I am," Gilead admitted with a bitter laugh. "When I brought Ancilla into the main family for the clan's sake, I was already prepared to bear a lot of resentment for it. I don't regret doing it. The Lionheart name is far too heavy to be borne by a single child. While I didn't want my children to be enemies, I did believe that some fraternal rivalry was necessary." Eugene stayed silent. "That's why I have no regrets," Gilead continued. "Although Euad might be my eldest son, as a future patriarch, his abilities were proving insufficient. So he needed siblings. He needed to be stimulated by a competitive rivalry to shore up his weaknesses and thus become someone suitable to be the next patriarch. But it looks like I've ultimately failed, both as a patriarch and a father." "Sir Patriarch, you're a good man," Eugene said as he clicked his tongue in sympathy. Gilead wasn't someone who deserved such self-criticism. At least in Eugene's view, Gilead was a great patriarch. "Thank you for saying that." Gilead rested his hand on Eugene's shoulder with a wry smile. "I've come to your room at such an early hour because I was worried that you might be feeling guilty because of this affair." Eugene denied this. "I don't feel guilty at all. That's how it should be. Because you did the right thing. As for Euad and Tanis, don't worry about them. You don't need to worry about Gerhard while he's staying at the main estate either." "Yes, sir." Eugene felt grateful for these words. Although Eugene had no reason to fear Tanis' resentment, he did feel a slight concern that Tanis might use this scandal as an excuse to oppress Gerhard. But now that Gilead had reassured him, there wasn't any need to feel concerned. On the other hand, Ancilla must be bursting with happiness right now, so she should take good care of my father. This was inarguable as Ancilla had been able to get rid of her 2 greatest obstacles, Tanis and Euad, without needing to do anything. Although it was unknown how long those 2 would be staying with their maternal relatives, during this time, Ancilla was sure to establish herself in her position as the madam of the main estate. "I've heard from Lovelian how great you've been doing," Gilead said, his expression softening as he looked at Eugene. "It turns out that you possess amazing talent not just for martial arts but also for magic. And you haven't neglected your training for even a day since you've arrived in Arath. I really am so proud of how dedicated you are." Eugene tried to downplay his achievements. "It's only because I'm excited to learn something new. And that's a good thing. If only you weren't adopted." Gilead swallowed these words before they could spill out of his throat. Instead he said, "Scion and Seal miss you greatly." Eugene accepted the change of subject. "Are they still working hard?" "They're working so hard it's almost excessive. Scion trains against Guillaume and me while saying that he will become stronger than you, and Seal also regularly comes out of her room to spar with Scion. Even though she wouldn't come out while I was there because she said that she hated the smell of sweat? Well, she's at a sensitive age, isn't she? Even though she always smiled at me and showed off her cute side when she was young. Talking about this makes me feel that time really has gone by pretty fast." Gilead smiled as he reminisced on the young seal. Though he understood that Seal was just growing up, he still sometimes missed his daughter's displays of cuteness. Patriarch, there's also something else. Eugene reluctantly began to speak. It's about how I've recently needed to spend a lot of money. A lot of money? Gilead repeated curiously. Although he didn't know for sure yet whether Garjeth had managed to win the bid for the Giant's balls, it might come up as a surprise later, so Eugene had decided to bring it up in advance. Eugene coughed and began to explain about Garjeth and his giant balls. You're saying that he's bought some giant's testicles? Gilead's eyes widened in surprise. Just like Eugene, he couldn't understand how someone would want to purchase a giant's balls at such a high price. Is it really that good for your body? Gilead wondered in disbelief. Well, even if it was truly that beneficial for his body, he wouldn't want to eat it. Since the giants are already so large, their testicles must be incredibly huge, so how could you eat something like that without going crazy? That should be the case, Eugene confirmed. Still somewhat perturbed, Gilead hesitantly began to speak. There's no issue with that. If he truly needs it then, ahem, and I also have an acquaintance with Viscount Stellord. Viscount Stellord was Garjeth's father. As he recalled that bulging muscle-bound relative of his, Gilead nodded and said, Don't be concerned about spending money. No matter how expensive it might be, if you need something, feel free to buy it no matter what. However, just, please don't buy anything related to black magic. Is it okay for me to have something like that? Eugene asked as he pointed to a table in the corner of his room. On top of the table was the unicorn heart he had brought back from the drug den. It's already been checked out by Master Lovelian, Eugene reassured him. Although it was intended to be used as a sacrifice, they didn't get around to truly offering it, so the head wizard said that it doesn't have any traces of black magic on it. If that's the case, I don't have any problems with it, Gilead replied. Is it really okay for me to keep it? You won it in battle, so I don't see why not. But the one who truly bought it was Ued. Don't worry about it. Since you've gone through a lot of trouble because of Ued, shouldn't you at least take something like that as compensation? As he said this, Gilead got up and continued, Of course, apart from that, if there's anything you need, feel free to buy it no matter how much it costs. You don't need to get my permission each and every time. Thank you very much, Eugene gratefully replied. Although he had received this guarantee, Eugene didn't have anything he really wanted to buy. If he wandered through Bolero Street's auction houses, he might be able to find quite a few rare items, but apart from their inherent value, they wouldn't be of much use to Eugene. Of course, lumps of mana like a unicorn's heart or mana stones were of great help in increasing one's mana levels. However, it wasn't necessarily a good thing to try and make excessive use of them just because of that. Rather than forcefully increasing the mana capacity, it was better to gradually increase the amount of mana that one had. Though I might be tempted if there was a dragon heart. No matter how useful the heart of a monster was, it was still just a monster's heart. They had a lot of impurities and lowered the purity of one's mana when used. The same went for mana stones. Mana obtained through this method wouldn't quite match one's body, and a lot of mana was lost during the process of refining it into the person's body. However, a dragon's heart was a different story. A pure lump of mana that, if absorbed properly, could allow the core to grow without any losses. But the only problem was that they were terribly difficult to find. It wasn't a question of whether or not it was even possible to hunt a dragon. The issue was that it was strictly forbidden. In his previous life, he and his comrades had been lucky enough to absorb a dragon heart. While they were venturing through Helmuth, they met a dying dragon. And following that dragon's last wishes, the party had taken the dragon heart and shared it between them. Looks like I need to go now, Gilead said as he looked out at the dawn sky. You don't need to come out and see me off. Besides, I'm afraid that Tanis won't have anything pleasant to say if she sees you. Eugene nodded and said, Please give my regards to my father, Sain and Seal. Oh, and Ancilla as well. All right, Gilead acknowledged with a smile. Make sure to keep working hard from now on. Gilead didn't feel the need to say something like that. Even if he didn't say anything, he was sure that Eugene would keep doing his best. Also, he didn't want to burden Eugene with any unnecessary words. Although I don't really believe that he'll feel burdened from something like that, Gilead mused. But Ued hadn't been able to endure the pressure placed on him by his surroundings. That had made Gilead more cautious than before. After once again looking at Eugene with affectionate eyes, he left the room. After Gilead had left, Eugene sighed, Looks like even patriarchs have it hard. As expected, Eugene still didn't want to become the patriarch. After reaffirming this desire, Eugene walked over to the unicorn's heart. There was no reason for him to pointlessly procrastinate, so he was thinking of absorbing the unicorn's heart right here and now. There were several methods for doing so. Although eating it directly was an okay way to go about it, Eugene didn't choose to use such a barbaric method. While circulating the white flame formula, he reached out to the heart. This is the cleanest and easiest way to do it, Eugene nodded. You would only be extracting the mana from the heart. This was the cleanest way to do it if one could exert complete control over the mana. Eugene concentrated his focus and grabbed the unicorn's heart. Food. The heart began to shake from vibrations. The mana contained within was drawn out completely before being absorbed by Eugene. Eugene did not lose focus as he examined the purity of the mana. Good. There aren't that many impurities. The huge amount of mana was circulated to his cores. From here on was the most crucial step. He needed to have his cores refine the mana while removing any unnecessary impurities. The trio of stars around his heart began to shine brighter as they went to work. As Eugene calmly directed the mana to flow into his cores, he fell into thought. If it's like this, it seems like I might be able to reach the 4th star before I turn 20. If the people at the main estate had heard this, they might have fainted from the surprise. In the 300 years of the Lionheart clan's history, not a single ancestor had managed to reach the 4th star before becoming an adult. Although I can't be sure that a star will form just because the quantity of my mana increases. After 4 years of practicing the white flame formula, Eugene had realized something. The increase in stars wasn't dependent solely on the amount of mana possessed but also on how deep the understanding of the white flame formula was and how skilled one was at circulating it through their whole body. In this respect, Eugene held an overwhelming advantage over his predecessors due to his past life, both in terms of improving his depth of understanding and his skill in circulating it throughout his body. These were both things that Eugene was definitely capable of doing. The Patriarch and Guion are at the 6th star. Vermouth had reached the 10th star. Reaching the 6th star alone was enough to get you recognized as one of a handful of the strongest warriors on the continent. It looks like I'll have to start mixing things up before I reach the 5th star. Eugene had no intention of blindly following the path left by the white flame formula. Since he had already learned a lot of things from his previous life, he felt that he might as well meld the formula together with everything he had inherited from Hamel. But it's still too early for that. Right now he was only 17. There was no need to be hasty. As he thought this, Eugene took his hand off the unicorn's heart. After all the mana had been sucked out of the heart, it had shrunk to the size of a finger. With a flick of his mana he disintegrated the heart. Then he took out the fragment of the moonlight sword that he had kept in his vest and placed it on the windowsill. Now I'm sure of it, he murmured. The fragment absorbed the moonlight shining in from outside the window and began to emit a soft, pale light. Eugene admired the light for a few moments. They cost 300 million sals, Gargith said as he handed Eugene's card back to him with a proud look on his face. Eugene couldn't help but blurt out a curse, motherfucker. I arranged for us to deposit the payment through a public bank. If we don't make the deposit before noon today, the right to purchase them will be transferred to the next highest bidder, so we need to hurry, prompted Gargith. Can't we just let them have it? Eugene asked. No, we can't. After all, I had to participate in such an explosive bidding war just to win the bid. How much was its initial price? 50 million sals. 50 million sals for a giant's balls. And it went up from there to 300 million sals. There really are just so many crazy bastards in this world. It's because it's just that valuable, Gargith said with a happy smile. If you were there to see it in person, you would probably understand what I'm feeling. Eugene scoffed. Even if I do see the giant balls in person, they definitely will just look like balls. No, it's different, Gargith insisted. Overwhelmingly so. At the very least, I'm sure that they'll definitely be overwhelmingly big. Were they hairy? Eugene asked in morbid curiosity. They looked really neat after they had been spruced up. Don't say another word because I really don't want to imagine what that looked like. Anyways, how do we go about making that deposit? Eugene and Gargith had arrived at Pentagon's public bank. They were here to deposit the cost of the balls into the auction house's secret account. Eugene was feeling flustered as this was his first time at a bank since he was reborn. And he didn't know the first thing about making a deposit into another person's account. Is this really your first time at a bank? Garjith asked. Eugene hesitated to admit it. I can't believe it, Garjith trailed off in shock. I had heard that Jidal was in the boonies, but they don't even have banks there? How is something like that even possible? Garjith was looking at Eugene with a sincere expression of disbelief. Eugene simply couldn't accept being treated like a bumpkin by someone with shaggy hair, strong body odor, bulging muscles, who wore frilly clothes, and who had bought giant's testicles for 300 million sals. Jidal has a bank as well, Eugene insisted. Then why are you acting like this is your first time? Because I never had a reason to visit it. So it turns out that you're a country bumpkin. Don't spout such bullshit. You can grab any passerby and ask them who looks more like a country bumpkin between the two of us, and we'll see what they say. It's wrong to judge people by their appearances. This son of a... Although Eugene really wanted to curse at him, Garjith's words were more or less correct. Eventually Eugene came up with a rebuttal. Is it really the right thing to call someone a country bumpkin just because they've never been to a bank before? You just need to go up to one of the windows and tell them that you need to make a deposit to this account, Garjith explained. Why aren't you answering me? You would usually get a ticket number, but since we're transferring such a large amount and even have a black card, there shouldn't be any need to wait. Follow me. Answer me, you pig bastard. I'm not a pig. Right up until they reached the counter, Garjith refused to answer his question. Sure enough, once they approached one of the bank employees and showed them the black card, they were immediately escorted to a private VIP room. Thank you for visiting our bank. The head of the bank came out personally to accept the card while bowing his head. Before too long they had finished setting up the deposit, and the bank manager returned with the card. The bank manager began peddling his services. Do you have any interest in opening up a separate personal account? If you make one now. No need, Eugene interrupted as he took the card and headed out of the bank. Smiling happily, Garjith followed behind Eugene. Let's head to my place, Garjith suggested. Why? Came the curt response. They said they'd make the delivery as soon as they received our deposit. Are you telling me to go all the way to your place just to get a look at those giant balls? Are you insane? If you see them for yourself, you're sure to change your mind about them. I've said it before, but if you want, I can give you some of their extract once it's been made. I said that I wasn't going to eat any of that shit. I just can't understand you. For now, let's head to your place. Have you changed your mind? Apart from the giant's balls, there's something else I want to see. Although he didn't have any interest in those balls, he was interested in the red flame formula that Garjith had inherited. While he had already taken a look at Gerhard's red flame formula, rather than that mostly unmodified formula, he wanted to see the red flame formula that had been improved by Garjith's family. Because their version is probably a lot better, Eugene thought. He wanted to compare theirs to the white flame formula to see where the differences lay. While thinking about this, Eugene stepped out of the bank. As he was heading down the stairs, Eugene's body suddenly froze to a halt. Huh, he gasped. In the square below the bank among the teeming crowds, he had spotted a glimpse of purple hair. Chapter 40. His mind was immediately fixated on those fluttering strands of hair. The moment he saw them, Eugene threw himself down the stairs without hesitation. Garjith was following behind him and he let out a startled cry, but the sound of his voice couldn't reach Eugene's ears. The square below was packed with people, but Eugene rushed into the crowd without caring. He made his way forward by pushing aside the people who got in his way and diving through the gaps. There was no way that Eugene had made a mistake. He would recognize that unique hair color even if he was forced to pick it out from hundreds or thousands of people. A seemingly unnatural brightly colored purple. That color was created by Sienna's vast amounts of mana spreading through her hair. It's Sienna, Eugene realized. Could it be a hallucination? Though there was no way. Eugene swung his head from side to side as he dove into the crowd. In a place like this and under such circumstances, there was no way that he could have been mistaken. When Eugene saw her, he stood rooted on the spot, stunned, staring straight ahead. He tried to speak, but words failed him. That was Sienna walking in the distance. It was definitely her. Her figure hadn't changed a bit compared to 300 years ago, though it seemed like her hair had gotten a lot longer. But that was only to be expected after 300 years had flown by. As Eugene clutched his pounding chest, he drew closer to Sienna. Although he had gotten right behind her, Sienna still hadn't noticed Eugene's presence. Eugene felt that was understandable considering how many people were in this square. But what was he supposed to say to her? Although Eugene had recognized Sienna, she probably wouldn't be able to tell who Eugene really was. I'm Hamel, but I was reincarnated as Vermouth's descendant. No, really. I'm telling you, this isn't a lie. I really am Hamel. As Eugene imagined how such a conversation would go, he reached out to Sienna. Sienna, that damn chick, wouldn't believe him so easily. She might even curse at him and tell him to stop with his bullshit. He would actually be thankful if she did, as it would mean that despite the passage of 300 years, her personality hadn't changed all that much from what he could remember of her. She would still have the same bad attitude and her mouth would be as rough as always. Sienna, Eugene called out her name with a shaking voice. Then he reached out and tried to grab Sienna's wrist, but he couldn't get a hold of her. Although she was right in front of him, Eugene couldn't touch Sienna. And that wasn't the only strange thing. Eugene blankly took in the scene as people began walking through Sienna's image from all sides. Truthfully, Eugene had already noticed this as he was getting closer. Sienna hadn't avoided any of the people walking in her direction, and they had all just walked right through her. And even though the color of her hair was so eye-catching, no one was paying any attention to her. Instead, they just kept eyeing Eugene with annoyed looks as he roughly barged his way through the crowd. A ghost. Eugene couldn't feel any presence coming from Sienna, who was right in front of him. He had reached out several times, but he still wasn't able to touch her. He couldn't feel any of the warmth of a human being coming from her. Although she didn't feel cold either. In fact, he couldn't feel anything from her. Like a phantasm or a ghost, even though it was definitely right in front of one's eyes, it didn't feel real. Sienna's footsteps stopped. Eugene also came to a halt. Sienna turned her head and Eugene lowered his outstretched hand. Since he couldn't catch her even if he tried to hold her, he felt that there was no point in continuing to try. Eugene looked at Sienna's face. And just as he had expected, the mansion's portrait and the statue in front of the Tower of Magic both looked better than the real thing. The Sienna in the portrait had softened her usually disgruntled expression and instead put on a benevolent smile. The Sienna sculpted into a statue was smiling with bravery and confidence. But the Sienna in front of him didn't have either of those expressions. Instead, her eyes were filled with irritation and fatigue. Her lips wouldn't stop mumbling day in and day out. At the very least, her face was still exactly as Eugene remembered. Now what kind of expression should he put on? First of all, Eugene showed her a grin. But then he had a sudden thought. If he just smiled at her like this, Sienna wouldn't be able to recognize him. Since she hadn't responded to his numerous calls from behind her, it looked like she probably couldn't hear his voice either. But she had still turned to look behind her. Didn't that mean that she could still see with her eyes? Tao then. Eugene immediately held up both of his middle fingers at Sienna. Sienna blinked in shock at this sight. Her lips parted slightly before closing once more. Then she giggled and smiled. That smile was exactly the same as the one that Eugene remembered. Sienna's lips began to move. Although he couldn't hear her voice, Eugene could tell what she was trying to convey from her silent lip movements. I found you. Sienna's lips formed these 3 words. Following this, Sienna's figure disappeared right in front of Eugene's eyes. Just like a puff of smoke, Sienna's image faded away into thin air. Eugene stood there dumbly for a few moments, staring at the spot where Sienna had disappeared. I've also found you, Eugene eventually said as he turned around with a grin. Sienna Meridian, Eugene muttered her name. His heart felt like a weight had been lifted off of it. Sienna wasn't dead. He was sure of it. The thing that he had seen just now was neither a ghost nor a phantom left behind after she had died. It was an illusion created by magic. I found you. Sienna was still alive. She had survived and come looking for Eugene. But how had she known to look? Was it because he had given the middle fingers to her portrait? If that pisses you off, you can come right at me. Hadn't he said something like that? Had she really heard those words and come looking for him? There's no way. The mansion had been preserved as a historical site for over 100 years. Countless people visited the mansion each day and blinded by superstition, they would mumble all sorts of things like passing their exams and whatnot, while staring at her portrait. No matter how great Sienna was, it would be impossible for her to come looking for Eugene after listening to all those mutterings. Maybe she was able to recognize my soul like Tempest did. Or else, Eugene lowered his gaze to look down at his necklace. She may have come looking for the necklace. There was probably some kind of spell cast on the necklace. Although he couldn't tell what kind of spell it might be, what Eugene knew for sure was that, Sienna knows that I've been reincarnated. She might have even been expecting it. And the fact that, Sienna hasn't died. However, it seemed like she was in a situation where she couldn't come to see him personally. So instead she had sent an illusion to come looking for him and welcome him back to life. She must be sealed somewhere, Eugene mumbled to himself nonchalantly. Could she have done it to herself? Even with magic, was it impossible for her to last the full 300 years without doing so? Or else was she sealed by someone? But who could have done it? A black wizard? A demon king? In any case, it's fine now that I know she's unable to move on her own. As he muttered this, Eugene stroked his necklace. Because you've come and found me this time, so... The smile that Sienna had shown him right before she had vanished into thin air just wouldn't fade from his mind. Such an annoying chick could actually smile at him like that. This was the first time that he had discovered such a fact. So next time I'll be the one who goes and finds you. Everything was fine as long as she hadn't died and was still alive somewhere. With a grin, Eugene left the square. Or at least he tried to. Gargeth suddenly caught up to him and asked, "Where on earth did you run off to in such a hurry?" "You don't need to know," Eugene dismissed the question. "This place isn't like Jidal. The streets here are as complex as a maze and there are a lot of mean and nasty people. A naive villager like you, ignorant of the world, would be tasty prey to people like that." "You fucker, are you really calling me a villager because I told you not to call me a country bumpkin? What the hell is the difference between a country bumpkin and a villager?" Although a country bumpkin is a derogatory term, a villager is just a realistic description. "Damn you, you pig bastard. You're the one using the wrong terms. I'm not a pig. After all, isn't pig used to describe people who are round and fat?" Eugene changed the subject. "You seem to have a lot of pride in your muscles, but after seeing them in action they're just big without much substance. Have you forgotten how you lost to me in the arm wrestling match?" "I just got distracted," Gargeth tried to excuse himself. "Distracted? That's bullshit. You were all tensed up even before we even started," Eugene grumbled as he slapped Gargeth on the back. "In my eyes, whether it's your prided muscles or a pig's jiggling fat, it all looks the same. Don't insult the muscles created by our family's revolutionary muscle growth agent." "I'm not insulting you. I just think it's a shame that such carefully sculpted muscles are going to waste. You shouldn't focus on just pointlessly increasing the size of your body, but instead, think of how to make the best use of your muscles." Indeed. Although Eugene had just spat out the first excuse that came to his mind, Gargeth's eyes lit up as if he had attained some great enlightenment. Gargeth nodded, "You're right. At some point it seems that I turned away from listening to the voice of my muscles and instead focused solely on showing them off. Leave that nonsense for later when you're on your own. Just show me your red flame formula," Eugene demanded. Eugene and Gargeth entered the gym attached to Gargeth's lodgings. Just as he had planned back at the bank, Eugene was here to witness Gargeth's operation of the red flame formula. "You've already learned the white flame formula, so why are you interested in the red flame formulas as well?" Gargeth asked. Eugene shrugged, "I'm just curious." "Well, it's not like it's difficult for me to show it to you." Without any further questions, Gargeth pulled off his shirt and threw it aside. Eugene didn't understand why Gargeth even felt the need to take off his clothes, but it seemed pointless to make a big deal out of it, so he calmly continued to watch Gargeth. While flexing his bulging muscles, Gargeth struck a pose and held it. Eventually, Eugene couldn't hold it in any longer. "You're just circulating the red flame formula, so why do you have to take such a distracting posture?" "It's my preference," Gargeth grunted. "Is that so?" Gargeth's eyes slowly sank into a calm focus. Soon his whole body was engulfed in reddish mana. This was the Lionheart Collateral Clan's red flame formula. At a glance, Eugene could already see the difference between it and the white flame formula. Between the two, the density of the mana was incomparable. Although it resembled the white flame formula in the way that it flickered like tongues of flame, this resemblance was only skin-deep as there was a huge difference in the actual power of the two scriptures. "Can the red flame formula also split the core?" Eugene asked curiously. "Our family's red flame formula can go up to the 5th star," Gargeth answered with pride. "The version of the red flame formula taught by the main family doesn't allow you to split off new cores. But various collateral branches have further developed the red flame formula. Thanks to the efforts of our amazing ancestors, our family has succeeded in increasing the number of stars that can be generated by the red flame formula to 5 stars. As far as I know, among all the versions of the red flame formula derived by the collateral lines, only a handful can generate 5 stars. Father's family could barely even reach the 2nd star, Eugene recalled. Looking at it this way, it seemed that the red flame formula would never be able to surpass the white flame formula. While stroking his chin, Eugene was lost in thought for a few moments. When he came out of his musing, he asked Gargith, "How many stars do you have?" "I'm on the 2nd star," said Gargith. The 2nd star of the red flame formula was incomparably weaker than the 2nd star of the white flame formula, which Eugene had already graduated from. Even though it's been developed over hundreds of years, the red flame formula is still limited to 5 stars. Vermouth, that bastard really was one hell of a genius. The direct line's white flame formula and the collateral line's red flame formula. And the red flame formula taught to the knights who serve the direct line doesn't even allow you to split off your core. All this said, the red flame formula was still an excellent mana training scripture. The knights who swore allegiance to the main family were honored to serve the Lionheart clan and took great pride in learning the red flame formula. No matter how hard I think about it, I just can't understand why. Vermouth wasn't such a petty bastard, but he had still ordered that the white flame formula be kept as the main family's secret, while the red flame formula would be taught to the collateral lines and their descendants. However, the main family was not allowed to use their strength to help develop it further, so the development of the red flame formula was left solely up to the collateral lines and their descendants. In this way, the gap between the direct and collateral lines could be narrowed but never closed. "I've seen enough," Eugene eventually declared. Although he still couldn't understand Vermouth's actions, Eugene wasn't too deeply invested in figuring it out. For now, what was clear was that the white flame formula was superior to the red flame formula. If it had enough potential, I was thinking of trying to graft the red flame formula onto the white flame formula, but it looks like there's no need. Even among all the collateral lines, the red flame formula belonging to Gargith's family was excellent enough to be counted as one of the best. But it still wasn't good enough to make Eugene feel eager to learn it. Looks like there's no need to add the red flame formula. Of course, what Eugene had seen wasn't the peak of the red flame formula's 5th star. However, just from the density of the mana and its movements that he had seen just now, it was enough for him to determine the full level of the red flame formula. So without any regrets, Eugene turned his back on it. "I'm heading off," he said. "You're leaving already?" Gargith asked. "But the giant's testicles should be arriving soon. I'll leave the fine inspection up to you. But I've already taken off my clothes and started circulating the red flame formula. How about a spar or a practice match? I'm definitely going to win anyway, so what's the point of sparring? Instead of thinking about that, why don't you, how did you put it? Listen closely to the voice of your muscles. That's some great advice." Gargith nodded his head as if he was deeply impressed. He immediately got down and started doing push-ups, but Eugene didn't turn to look back at Gargith. "So Akron, huh?" Sienna's smile had yet to fade from Eugene's mind. Didn't they say that Sienna left her last grimoire there? The 3-volume series Witchcraft. There was nothing that stood out in her mansion. The same goes for her statue as well. If so, could that mean that there's something in the Green Tower of Magic's library? That was the place where Sienna could usually be found during her time as the Tower Master. It would be ridiculous of me to start snooping around the Green Tower of Magic for no reason. For now, I'll need to wait for the reply to Lovelian's recommendation letter to see if I'm permitted to enter Akron. Balzac Ludbeth, the Black Tower Master, had also said that he would write a letter of recommendation for Eugene. Since things had turned out like this, Eugene felt that he could expect a positive reply to these letters of recommendation. "There's no need to be in such a hurry," Eugene muttered to himself as he headed into the Red Tower of Magic. "It's not like I'm the one who's been kept waiting. Since they had already waited 300 years for him, there shouldn't be any complaints if they waited a little longer. It's not like I asked to be reincarnated, you know?" Instead of returning to his room, Eugene headed straight for the elevator and rode it down to the underground laboratories. Besides, I should be able to find them within 10 years at the very latest. Since they've already been waiting for so long, they can wait a little longer. Entering an empty laboratory, he closed the door behind him. Then he casually tossed aside the coat he was wearing and placed the fragment of the moonlight sword in the center of the laboratory. Let's start by examining it step by step. As he muttered this, Eugene stared down at the fragment of the moonlight sword. He had watched as the fragment continued to soak up the moonlight all morning. Although nothing seemed special about it, other than the fact that it could emit light, it was definitely still a fragment of that terrifying moonlight sword. A sword that only Vermouth had been able to use. Eugene hummed as he slowly circulated the white flame formula. Using the stars around his heart as circles, he cast a spell. Whoosh! A huge fireball appeared in front of Eugene. Although it was only a first circle offensive spell, the fireball created from the mana of the white flame formula was so huge that it was impossible to believe it was merely a first circle spell. Eugene confidently tossed the fireball at the fragment of the moonlight sword, but it didn't even leave a scorch mark. The moment the fireball touched the fragment, the mysterious power of the fragment scattered all the mana contained within the spell, disintegrating it. It's different from the devouring sword, Eugene observed. The devouring sword, Asphalt, cut apart the magical structure and swallowed the mana. It's also different from Geddon's shield. Geddon's shield sent any attack that connected with it veering off in another direction. This destroys the structure of a spell just by touching it. That's how it scatters the mana contained within a spell. Eugene recalled Vermouth's favorite method of attack. When he held Asphalt, he would cut apart all the spells that came his way and use the mana to increase his own strength. Although it was strong enough to cut apart most spells, it was impossible for Asphalt to cut apart the magic of high-ranking demons and demon kings. This resulted in their battle with the Demon King of Carnage being hellishly difficult. However, after obtaining the Moonlight Sword, even the spells of those high-ranking demons and demon kings couldn't touch Vermouth. All magic would disintegrate as soon as it touched the Moonlight Sword. Then Vermouth would immediately swing Asphalt, swallowing up all the scattered mana and converting it into his own strength before attacking. It's impossible for such a tiny fragment to disintegrate high-ranking spells. However, something like a low-level spell would be dispersed immediately. Under these circumstances, even placing it in a wooden box is enough to conceal its power. The condition for the power of the Moonlight Sword to be activated was that it needed to come into direct contact with the mana. As an example, Eugene had been able to operate the white flame formula as usual even while carrying the wooden box next to his chest. Just by carrying it around with me when I go out, I can deal with any surprise attacks. It was a barbaric way to use it. However, wasn't the power of that fragment itself rather barbaric? Since that's the case, let's just be barbaric together. With a happy smile, Eugene pulled out WYD. If that fragment doesn't interfere with my mana. The mana pulled up by the white flame formula engulfed WYD. And if it doesn't interfere with any spells I cast. After manifesting his sword light, he cast his spells. Dozens of magic missiles obediently hovered around Eugene. Then that means that the density of my mana increases with every increase in the level of my white flame formula. Chapter 41. Rumors concerning the 11th laboratory in the basement of the Red Tower of Magic had reached Hera, causing her to tilt her head in curiosity. Laboratory 11 was used almost exclusively by Eugene, but rumors about sounds of explosions and constant vibrations coming from there had been spreading since a few days ago. The sound of the explosions and the vibrations can even reach the outside of the laboratory. The magical specialty of the Red Tower of Magic was summoning magic. This type of magic had a lot of variables that needed to be taken into account during the summoning process, so the magic as a whole tended to be rather volatile. As such, explosions and vibrations were common, so all the laboratories had been thoroughly secured against them. With Eugene's level of magic, there shouldn't be any way to create an explosion that can be heard from outside the room, but recently, Hera had been preoccupied with various things. Although she had been taking a break after her previous research project, she had been greatly inspired by Eugene's success in using a core in place of a circle. So Hera had stopped working as a librarian and focused on her preparations for a new research project. She hadn't been able to return to Eugene's laboratory since her last visit because of this. However, thanks to a command from the Tower Master, along with these rumors, Hera could no longer remain in her own laboratory. Young wizards were frequently faced with an issue. When someone first starts practicing magic, they could get caught up in repeating certain experiments due to their excessive enthusiasm and end up injuring themselves despite their great talent. Hera didn't want that monstrous boy with his overflowing talent to suffer a needless injury due to excessive use of magic. Sir Eugene, she called out. Rumors were often greatly exaggerated. The basement laboratories were as quiet as usual, with no signs of explosions or vibrations when Hera arrived. Having been relieved by this fact, Hera was soon knocking on the door of Laboratory 11. Are you in? Before she could even finish her question, there was a loud bang. Along with this loud noise, the door to Laboratory 11 began to shake. Startled, Hera immediately pulled out her staff and held it in front of her before throwing open the door without any further hesitation. See, Sir Eugene. Are you Once again she wasn't able to finish her sentence. Hera's jaw dropped at the scene that was taking place in front of her very eyes. The floor was covered in fine cracks with no spots seemingly left intact. Eugene had been left swaying in a thick roiling fog of mana. It was obviously the site of an accident. With a frown, Hera swung her staff. Fwoosh! The entire billowing fog of mana was immediately dissipated. Sir Eugene. Once more she was unable to finish what she was saying. This time Hera's words trailed off as she lowered her staff. But in the middle of her voice trailing off, Hera was forced to swallow a gulp. Phew! Eugene sighed as he shook his head and wiped away the sweat that covered his body. Standing in the center of the laboratory, Eugene was wearing only a comfortable pair of pants. In other words, this meant that Eugene's upper body, which was shining with sweat, could be seen plainly. What kind of 17-year-old has a body like that? Hera wondered in disbelief. Taking another gulp, Hera slowly turned her gaze to the side. But before she did so, she subtly took another look at Eugene's body. Although this wasn't the case for all wizards, most wizards had poor physiques. Since most of their work was spent sitting around and researching without anything that had them moving around and working up a sweat, their limbs grew ever thinner even as their bellies ballooned outward. At least in the Red Tower of Magic, there wasn't a single wizard with a chiseled body like Eugene. Even though Lovelian took regular care of himself, his muscles weren't as cut as Eugene's. Hera counted silently, 1, 2, 3, 6. This was her first time seeing a real six-pack. Hera gulped once more before taking a few steps back. Then, upon realizing her mistake, she felt a jolt of surprise and looked up at Eugene once more. This just so happened to grant her another view of his bare torso. Hera stammered an apology. I'm so sorry. I should have waited for a reply before entering, but there was a loud noise, so I... It's okay, Eugene replied with a nonchalant expression. Calling on the sylphs who were frolicking in the air around him, he had them blow away the sweat dripping down his body. I was going to respond, but I wanted to finish what I was doing first, Eugene explained. What you were doing? And may I ask what that was exactly? Hera asked after getting a hold of her shaking thoughts. She had thought that he might have been practicing summoning magic, but after looking around the laboratory, it didn't seem like that was the case. Hera observed, I don't see any magic circles. But what's that? A fragment of some unknown metal was lying in the center of the laboratory. The surrounding floor had been cracked and overturned, but the area beneath the fragment was intact without any traces of damage. I was training my mana. I also combined that with some magic practice, Eugene answered with a shrug. It was a week after the incident on Bolero Street. Eugene had spent most of his days inside this laboratory. This was to train his magic and mana by using the fragment of the Moonlight Sword as a target. The results weren't very satisfying. Even the sword light he created by mustering all his will would dissipate as soon as it got close to the fragment. The same went for magic, and even the sylphs that he summoned wouldn't approach the fragment of the Moonlight Sword. When he tried to forcefully order them to do so, the moment they drew near, they would be banished back to the spirit realm. However, it wasn't like there were absolutely no results. At first, his spells would disintegrate before they could even explode, but now it was possible for him to forcibly hold onto the scattered mana and cause an explosion in the fragment's vicinity. That meant that the cohesion of his mana was growing stronger. Magic training? Hera asked curiously. Like this, Eugene demonstrated. Instead of explaining things step by step, Eugene immediately cast a spell. Over the past week, the spells he had been using the most were the First Circle's Magic Missile and Fireball. Hera's eyes shook at the speed with which he cast these spells. He's gotten even faster, she realized. Even though Eugene was already unbelievably fast the last time she saw him when he first cast those spells, His current speed was even faster than back then. At first glance, the speed was enough to make it feel like he may have used a magic scroll instead. But that wasn't a scroll. Just now, did he really personally activate his mana and totally use his cores like they were circles? Hera asked herself in disbelief. The absence of an incantation was no longer a surprise. Although it might have been faster, that wasn't the only thing strange about Eugene's spells. Hera paid close attention to the structure of the mana that made up Eugene's spell. The structure was so tight and sophisticated that it was hard to believe that this was created by Eugene's skills in magic. The cohesion of the mana was also incredibly strong, to the point where it would be hard to find a dispel capable of collapsing its structure. No one would believe that these were just a first circle magic missile and fireball. Are you practicing magic dueling techniques? Hera asked hesitantly. The fact that his spells were difficult to dispel meant that Eugene would have an edge in magical dueling. Since this would also amplify the power of his spells, the current Eugene would be able to face a wizard at a higher level without backing down. Although it has had that effect, I was more focused on training the overall quality of my mana. As he said this, Eugene allowed the spells to dissipate. Instead of scattering into his surroundings, the mana immediately engulfed Eugene's body. The transition between using the mana for his spells and the white flame formula flowed as smoothly as water. Hera eventually made the observation, "It looks like you've achieved quite some results." "Yes," Eugene replied with a grin. As she calmed her chest, which was pounding from surprise, Hera stared at Eugene. The pure white flames that had engulfed his body were exuding a sense of intimidation that was difficult to describe. However, Eugene's face still retained its usual naive impression because of his youthful appearance. With a face like that, to think he had a body rippling with such muscles. Hera slapped her chest, which continued to pound disobediently, and started coughing. Hera reminded him, It's fine as long as you're not hurt. But Sir Eugene, please don't push yourself too far. If you do get hurt, you're not the only one who will suffer. Both the head wizard and the Red Tower of Magic will be placed in a difficult position." "Yes, I'll be careful," Eugene nodded obediently with a smile. Hera wasn't just being polite with this warning. A week ago, Ewed had left the Red Tower of Magic and returned to the main estate. Eugene hadn't seen him off, nor had he held any desire to watch Ewed depart. Whether that stupid eldest son would get his head screwed on straight because of this incident, or if he became even more twisted and turned into a true asshole, Eugene no longer felt the need to care about it. That would be Tana's job. Since she had decided to separate from Gilead and take her son with her to her maternal relatives, she would be the one responsible for furthering her son's education. In any case, it was true that the Red Tower of Magic and Lovelian himself had been left in a difficult position because of this affair. Lovelian had continued to harbor Ewed, despite the complaints and ridicule of his fellow wizards, only for Ewed's true ugly nature to be revealed to all the citizens of Pentagon. Though there had already been many rumors of Ewed's poor behavior since a while back, having his crimes directly publicized instead of simply remaining as rumors had created a whole new set of problems. Thanks to Ewed, a large-scale crackdown on drugs had also begun on Bolero Street, and the allowance made for the black wizards belonging to the guild and, of course, the demon folk had become even stricter. But the truth was that the greatest victim of this whole affair was the Lionheart's main family. The honor that had been passed down from their ancestor, the Great Vermouth, now had sewage smeared all over it because of the fact that the eldest son Ewed had tried to make a contract with an incubus. "I did the right thing by not having any children," felt Eugene. When he had first arrived at the Lionheart clan's main estate, he had felt regret and had told himself that he should have left some descendants in his previous life. But now he no longer held such regrets. If someone calling himself Hamel's descendant had done something as stupid as Ewed, just imagining it was terrifying. If it were me, I would have broken my coffin and crawled out of the grave to teach him a lesson. While thinking such thoughts, Eugene reabsorbed the mana. "Did you come all the way here just because you were worried about me?" he asked Hera. Hera stammered, "No, I mean yes. Are you saying that I'm wrong or right?" "Although I was a bit worried. I've also come here because of a different matter." "What would that be?" Eugene asked. For now, please put on some clothes," Hera said as she once again turned her gaze away. It was only then that Eugene realized he was currently topless. Sorry about that," Eugene apologized. "As I was training, I was sweating too much." "It's fine," said Hera. Thanks to that she got to see something good. As she recalled the memory stored within her head, Hera licked her lips. She suddenly remembered a memory retention spell. A refreshing smile spread across Hera's face as she thought about extracting this memory later on and saving it as a video. Hera continued, "The head wizard asked me to fetch you, Sir Eugene. Are we going up to the top floor?" Eugene confirmed. "No, the head wizard is actually away from his office right now." "Then where are we going?" "To Akron," Hera revealed with a wide smile. These words caused Eugene to smile just as broadly. Within the capital city of Arath, Pentagon. In the center of the five-sided shape drawn by the five towers of magic, there lies the royal castle of Arath, named Abram. Built at the heart of a great lake, Abram cannot be entered without riding a boat to get there. Even the aerial carriages that fly freely in the skies above Pentagon are not allowed to get close to Abram's airspace, and it is impossible to cross the lake with the use of magic. This was because Abram and the lake surrounding it were completely covered by a magic ceiling formation. 300 years ago, the wise Sienna developed the magic ceiling formation as her trump card. This formation blocked the use of mana in a specific area while still allowing her own mana to be used. The magic ceiling formation that covered all of Abram was offered as a gift to the royal family by Sienna, and even now, after hundreds of years had passed, it was still working as perfectly as ever. They were currently at the Royal Library Akron. Its majesty did not fall short in comparison to Abram, which could be seen in the far distance. Eugene alternated between looking up at the tall clock tower of Akron and over the lake at Abram. "That's just crazy," Eugene remarked internally. Thanks to the fact that he had recently been diligently studying books on magic, he had reached a general understanding of magic. According to Eugene's newly developed common sense, it definitely didn't seem possible to cover all of that huge lake and the royal castle within a magic ceiling formation. 300 years ago, there wasn't anything resembling a lake surrounding the royal castle. This lake was also part of Sienna's gift. In less than a week, she had constructed that enormous lake and moved the entire royal castle from where it used to be into the center of that lake. "Isn't it amazing?" Hera pointed to Abram with a bright smile and said, "Even the tower masters aren't able to use magic when they're at Abram. The only ones allowed to use magic there are the royal family and the court wizards who have sworn absolute obedience to the royal family." "If that's the case, does that mean that the tower masters haven't sworn absolute loyalty to the royal family?" Eugene asked. Hera found this difficult to answer. Although they have sworn loyalty, you can't expect them to obey even the most unreasonable orders unconditionally, right? You could describe the relationship between the Towers of Magic and Arath to be more along the lines of mutual cooperation, rather than a relationship based on fealty and obedience. The king didn't have much involvement in the politics that governed Arath. The ones that the Towers of Magic hold a deep connection with isn't the royal palace, but rather the parliament. Since the royal palace has a court wizards division, the wizards of the Towers of Magic are considered the matching power base of the parliament. However, that doesn't mean that our two wizard organizations are in conflict with each other. Arath was at peace. There was no threat of civil war and there were no enemies outside the kingdom either. After the end of the war 300 years ago, the whole continent was at peace. It wasn't like there weren't a few civil wars or wars fought between small countries, but there had never been a war as great as the one from 300 years ago. "Do you want to go and visit Abram?" Hera tilted her head and asked upon seeing Eugene continuing to gaze over at Abram. "I'm just staring because it's so amazing," Eugene explained. "After all, it isn't a place I can visit just because I want to, right? That's just how it is. Because only great nobles and tower masters are allowed to visit Abram." But if it's you, Sir Eugene, you might be able to go there." "Because I'm a Lionheart?" "That's part of it, but if you do receive permission to enter Akron, you may also receive a summons from the royal palace. I've never been there myself, but I've heard about it from head wizard Lovelian." As she said this, Hera led the way forward. "It's not my place to tell you about it. You'll probably hear all the details regarding that from Lovelian later today." Together with Hera, Eugene entered Akron. As an attraction of such significance, it should have been crowded with tourists, but the area around Akron was empty without a single tourist to be found. This was because of the massive entrance fee. It was also impossible to approach the vicinity of Akron without obtaining prior permission. This permission also only allowed access up to the first floor. From the second floor onwards, it was impossible to even step foot in them without an entrance pass. Well then, I'll be heading back now, Hera stated. Hera did not possess an entrance pass. Since she was unable to lead him any further, she just nodded her head at Eugene. She encouraged him, Sir Eugene, don't be too nervous. Good luck. Yes, I'll do my best. Eugene accepted her good wishes. Eugene grinned as he pumped his fist in response to her cheer. This was the Royal Library, Akron. Although the Red Tower Master and the Black Tower Master may have written him letters of recommendation, the other 3 Tower Masters had questioned Eugene's qualifications to earn an entrance pass into Akron. He might be a member of the Lionheart clan left by the Great Vermouth, but no matter how great the hero's descendants were in the end, wasn't Eugene just a young man without a firm grasp of magic? Akron was not such an easy place to allow you entry with just a letter of recommendation. This was the place where Aratha's magical history as well as the wise Sienna's distilled wisdom was kept. My name is Eugene Lionheart, he declared. He was in a spacious room on the first floor. As soon as Eugene entered, he bowed his head deeply. Lovelian and Balzac, along with the rest of the 5 Tower Masters, stared down at Eugene. But they weren't the only ones. Both the chief of the Royal Palace's Court Wizard Division and the guild head of the Wizards Guild were there as well. Raise your head, a voice called out. A young man who was only a few years older than Eugene was sitting calmly amid all these giant movers and shakers of Arath. Since a few years ago your name has often reached my ears. I had hoped that I might be able to meet with you at some point, but I truly didn't expect that we would meet in a place like this. Honian Abram, the Crown Prince of Arath, smiled down at Eugene. Chapter 42. Eugene looked up at the Crown Prince, who was only 4 years older than him. Honian wasn't just the Crown Prince of Arath. He was also an excellent wizard in his own right. He's a 5th Circle wizard, Eugene recalled. From generation to generation, the royal family of Arath continued to produce excellent wizards. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they had continued to improve their bloodline's affinity for magic over the course of hundreds of years. And even among all those specially cultivated talents, Honian was particularly excellent. Every member of Aratha's royal family was introduced to magic from an early age, but Honian was the first to have reached the 5th Circle before even reaching adulthood. He was a certified genius. Even Eugene was familiar with the stories surrounding Honian. After all, he was the crown prince who was first in line to succeed the throne. Although Eugene had been warned by Hera in advance, it still felt strange to face this handsome prince in person. Eugene contemplated, I only met with royalty a few times even in my previous life, but since I've been reincarnated as Vermouth's descendant, I get to meet a member of royalty when I'm just 17. He didn't really have any ties to royalty in his previous life. Although Vermouth was often called here and there, the orphaned Hamel didn't receive many invitations, and it had been common for him to ignore the few invitations that he did receive. Do you know the reason why you're here? The one who spat out this question and marked the beginning of the interview was an uptight-looking wizard. He was the Blue Tower Master. Although he appeared to be middle-aged, his actual age should be much older than that. He glared down at Eugene with eyes full of dissatisfaction and irritation. The Blue Tower Master continued, Eugene Lionheart, I've heard many rumors about you, but for you to arrive here. Both the Red Tower Master and the Black Tower Master have been praising you to the point that it seems like exaggeration. The Blue Tower Master then looked at Lovelian and Balzac with narrowed eyes. As they felt his gaze turned towards them, Balzac just shook his head with a faint smile while Lovelian snorted. But of course I'm well aware of the fact that you are astounding, to the point where that criminal brother of yours can't even compare, the Blue Tower Master conceded. However, being able to swing a weapon and emit sword force, isn't that completely different from being good at magic? The Blue Tower Master did not appreciate being put in this situation. The one facing him was just a 17-year-old kid. On top of that, Eugene was just a baby chick who had only just started practicing magic a few months ago. A kid like that had been able to get letters of recommendation from 2 Tower Masters and was now in front of a panel who would decide whether or not to bestow him with permission to enter Akron. The Blue Tower Master absolutely could not accept or even acknowledge such an embarrassment. No matter how he looked at it, this seemed to be a case of solicitation. Irrespective of how talented a 17-year-old kid who had just started learning magic a few months ago was, he couldn't be all that great, could he? Of course, he recognized the fact that Eugene had talent, But that wasn't enough for him to accept the idea that Eugene deserved an entry permit into Akron. Currently, there weren't just a few wizards in Aroth who had been called geniuses when they were young. All wizards permitted to enter a tower of magic must have been called a genius at least or twice in their youth. They were all diamonds in the rough with overflowing talent. Even wizards like that would eagerly wait decades just for a chance to enter Akron. But a brat like Eugene, who couldn't be considered more than a young chick in terms of his accomplishments in magic, was in the running for entry into Akron? No matter how much the Blue Tower Master thought about this felt uncomfortably like favoritism. The Red Tower Master has long been friends with the Lionheart's patriarch, and as for the Black Tower Master, I would have to guess that he wants to use this shameful affair as a chance to better his relationship with the Lionheart clan, the Blue Tower Master speculated. After all, wasn't the timing of this offer too perfect to be true? Just as Euad, the eldest son of the Lionheart family, had failed to make much in the way of achievements, Eugene had arrived and letters of recommendation had been written for him shortly thereafter. The Blue Tower Master wasn't the only one thinking something along those lines. Although the Green Tower Master and White Tower Master weren't showing it, they also didn't appreciate being called to participate in this sham. I understand what you are trying to say, but what do I need to do to prove that I am worthy? Eugene asked without showing any hesitation. Then, as if he had been waiting for this, Lovelian spoke up. All you need to do is show us your magic. Eugene confirmed. Is that really all you need? Yes, Lovelian said with a nod before turning to look at the other Tower Masters. If you could cast a spell in front of us, Sir Eugene, these famous wizards who have gathered here today will take the chance to examine your skill in magic. The Blue Tower Master complained. Usually we would look at the results of your research and the papers that you have worked on. But since you've never done any research, let alone worked on a thesis, I guess that will just have to do. Lovelian narrowed his eyes at the grumbling from the Blue Tower Master. Although Lovelian understood the Blue Tower Master's displeasure, he was offended by how his fellow head wizard kept openly showing him such disrespect in this formal setting. If that's what you need, Eugene slowly nodded his head in acceptance. Eugene had already prepared himself for the fact that he wouldn't always be treated favorably, so he didn't take offense from the Blue Tower Master's rudeness. Taking a deep breath, Eugene drew on his mana. As the stars around his heart began to shine, all the wizards in the room were staring at Eugene with calm expressions. Their eyes weren't focused on Eugene's body but instead on the movements of his mana within his body. Honian, who wasn't unable to see such things with his own abilities, lowered a pair of thin glasses onto the bridge of his nose. After a few moments, Honian's lips parted and he released an appreciative hum. The Blue Tower Master's expression shifted. Indeed, Eugene certainly wasn't using a circle, but he wasn't just using a core either. Eugene was using all three of the stars generated by the Lionheart main family's white flame formula. As the three stars resonated with each other, they gathered Eugene's mana and amplified it. Brilliant white flames engulfed Eugene's body. Up until this point there wasn't anything particularly remarkable. Then, the moment that the white flame formula began operating in earnest, the movements of the cores began to change. The resonating stars started to rotate in an interlocked pattern. Like this, the three stars became one circle. It's a circle. So the cores and circles aren't separate from each other. By making the different cores resonate with each other, they form one circle. Eugene had only created a single circle. But not a single wizard here believed that to be just a simple first circle. The density of his mana, it's ridiculous. Although he's been training his mana for several years now, that just makes it even more unbelievable. Eugene Lionheart has only been training his mana for 4 years now. I don't know about his talents for martial arts, but they do say he was born with a talent for mana control. But that still isn't enough, the Blue Tower Master judged, his eyes growing cold. Having excellent mana control is a completely different matter from having an excellent understanding of magic. You couldn't become an archwizard just because you had great control over mana. The description of great in front of the name Vermouth Lionheart and the title attached to him as the Master of All was because he had risen to a never-before-seen level not just in martial arts but also in magic. Combining the core and the circle was extremely wasteful in terms of mana. Although many people in this world called themselves magic swordsmen, most of these magic swordsmen were only of so strength if you considered their martial arts and magic separately. It had been 300 years since the time of the Great Vermouth. Since then there had been many talented individuals in the Lionheart's direct line, but not a single person among them had shown the same level of prowess in magic as they had in the martial arts. Their ability to use the mana from their cores to create sword light and sword force, and their skill at handling weapons, did not present any great advantage when plumbing magic's infinite depths. The opposite was also true. Among those archwizards whose names had gone down in history, not a single one had been good at fighting while personally swinging a weapon in close combat. Even if the mana control required by both was similar, martial arts and magic were always meant to be two separate disciplines. One by one Eugene showed off all the spells that he could cast. The white flames of the white flame formula transformed into a blade of wind and then into a red fireball. For a moment, it looked as if the fireball was about to dissipate, only to reform as dozens of bullets. Then the bullets united as one to form an elongated blade. During the transformation process of his magic, Eugene never once uttered an incantation. And there was no wastage of mana, even when the magic was broken down to be reformed. Instead, all of the mana that had been used for the first spell was saved to be used in the next spell. The Green Tower Master, who had been watching silently, asked, "Are you able to use magic and sword light simultaneously?" Instead of replying immediately, Eugene directly showed it to them. Without stopping the transformation of his magic, he extended his right hand forwards. There was no need for him to pull out a sword or some other weapon. Instead, the flames of the white flame formula were concentrated in his right hand and became a blade of pure mana. Its appearance was enough to finally astonish the wizards watching him. His circle hadn't collapsed. While using a core in place of a circle, he had still been able to use it as a core as well. Since it had come to this, the Blue Tower Master's expression couldn't help but harden. Was it really possible to construct a working mechanism from the parts of two completely different machines? And not just their appearance. Could he really have fully combined their functions as well? Even if it were possible, how could a boy who had only been practicing magic for a few months have been the one to do it? An incantation less at that. Eugene had used mental calculations to link his techniques and his will alone to activate them. This meant that he must have fully comprehended all the magic he had learned. The Blue Tower Master let out a low groan of frustrated admiration. Lovelian turned his head to him with a proud smile and asked, "How is he?" The Blue Tower Master fumbled for a reply. Lovelian confessed, "I've also often heard that I was a prodigy ever since I was a child, but even I wasn't able to use magic as well as he does when I was only 2 months into practicing magic." Lovelian wasn't the only one that this applied to. All of the Tower Masters had been called geniuses since a young age, and they all held pride in their overflowing passion and talent for magic. However, none of them had been able to control their magic as well as Eugene did when they were at his age and experience level. "I think we need to hold a discussion," the Green Tower Master murmured. The Blue Tower Master just nodded without further argument. "I guess we do. Sir Eugene, would you be willing to wait outside for a few minutes?" "Yes, sir," Eugene obediently replied. "It won't take that long. Although you're not allowed to go to any of the other floors. Since there are a lot of interesting sights on the first floor, please spend some time taking a look around." Eugene bowed his head and left the room. Right afterward, the Blue Tower Master turned towards Lovelian and asked, "Red Tower Master, are you sure that you haven't given him any guidance whatsoever? Haven't I already said it so many times?" "I haven't given Eugene any sort of guidance," denied Lovelian. "Then I just can't understand it. If what you're saying is true, that means Eugene Lionheart reached such a level just through self-study, without anyone else guiding him. He diligently read all sorts of books," Lovelian added. "That just makes it even harder to understand. I have no intention of denigrating the quality of the magic books possessed by the Red Tower of Magic. But didn't you say that the only magic books that Eugene Lionheart read were the introductory texts on magic?" Shaking his head, the Blue Tower Master continued speaking. Having only studied such introductory books on magic, could he really have reached such an understanding of magic? He is a Lionheart, after all. The one who spoke up this time was Honian, the Crown Prince of Arath. He stared at the door that Eugene had closed behind him as he left with shining eyes and continued, "Someone from the Lionheart clan of the Keel Empire. A descendant of the Great Vermouth. Everyone on the continent knows just how superb their bloodline is, right?" Came murmurs of agreement. "But Crown Prince, isn't Eugene Lionheart just an adopted child who hasn't inherited the blood of the direct line?" one of the panel members argued. That might be the case, but isn't his surname still Lionheart? Even though he comes from a distant collateral line, Eugene Lionheart's genius is truly indisputable. At least that's how it appears to me. As he took off his glasses, Honian turned towards the others and asked, "What do you all think? I feel like we have met an indescribable genius in Eugene Lionheart. I believe that he deserves to enter Akron. But he's far too young." The guild head, who had been listening silently, suddenly spoke up. "I can't help but acknowledge Eugene Lionheart's genius. But setting his ingenuity aside, he's too young and his level of magic is still too low. For now it is," the Black Tower Master Balzac interjected. "But that's why I believe that now, more than ever, is an important time for him. If Eugene enters Akron now, his magic will be able to develop rapidly. But the main question is whether there is even any need to provide him with such a convenience," the Green Tower Master said as he shook his head. "The younger he is, the more reason why we shouldn't rush him into anything. Since we also need to consider Akron's prestige as long as the Red Tower Master guides him personally for the next few years. There shouldn't be any problem with waiting for him to reach a level that makes it impossible for anyone to object before allowing him free entry into Akron. I don't believe that there's any need to procrastinate like that," Honian argued with his arms crossed defensively. "With the talent that he's shown us today, Eugene Lionheart will become an outstanding wizard even without any special guidance. Although I wonder if his magic formula could also be classified into circles. If I had to guess, then I believe that he'll be able to cast spells at the fourth circle without too much trouble before he even becomes an adult. At the very least, the one who spoke up this time was the only woman on this panel, the White Tower Master." As she twisted strands of her curly hair between her fingers, she continued speaking. "The spells that the Lionheart kid cast just now, although they were all first circle spells, their power far exceeded that of the first circle. You all felt that, right?" Came another hum of agreement. The White Tower Master added, "Apart from the purity of his mana and the sophistication of his spell structures, what was particularly surprising was the cohesion of his mana. Although I would need to attempt it personally in order to confirm it, I believe that even a dispel at the level of a fourth circle wouldn't be able to dispel that kid's magic." "I would agree," Lovelian nodded his head with a soft smile. "I think that it would be good to consider this as an investment." After exchanging a look with Honian, the chief of the court wizards had broken his silence. "He's a 17-year-old with outstanding talent who was adopted into the Lionheart's main family. Although he's young and his skills aren't quite up there, isn't he overflowing with potential? In any case, if his age and skills were enough, there would be no questions about allowing him to enter Akron. So why don't we issue the entrance permit in advance so that we can build a friendly relationship with him?" One of the others objected. "Is there a need for that? We already have quite the amicable relationship with the Lionheart clan anyways." The chief argued, "I believe that it would be a worthwhile investment to be owed a personal favor from Eugene Lionheart, not just the Lionheart clan. But even if that's the case, it's not like he'll be able to become the patriarch, no?" the Green Tower Master murmured with a slight frown. At this, Balzac shrugged his shoulders with a grin and said, "Of course that should be the case. Because no matter how amazing his skills are, Sir Eugene is still an adopted child. The patriarch will probably be one of the main family's twins. Scion Lionheart." Someone recalled his name. "Yes. By order of inheritance, Ewed Lionheart should have the advantage, but due to the latest unfortunate incident, since his skills were also quite lacking, it seems that Ewed will have no choice but to be pushed out of the race for succession. Even if Eugene Lionheart is unable to become the patriarch, his position in the main family will by no means be small. The Lionheart's second madam seems to be well aware of this fact. Instead, it is because he is unable to become the patriarch that I believe it would be well worth it to invest in Eugene Lionheart." As he made his argument, the chief of the court wizards turned to look at the tower masters and the guild head with calm eyes. "Someday Eugene Lionheart will have no choice but to leave the main estate. Should he wish to get married and have children, it is a rule of the Lionheart clan that he must leave to become independent of the main family." "Are you saying that you want to invite him to a Roth at that point?" someone asked. "Since he is sure to have the skills needed to qualify for an important position by that point, I don't believe that there is anything wrong with making preparations in advance," the chief concluded. "Even if he doesn't become independent, I think there will be enough value in having him owe us a favor." As long as he doesn't become the patriarch, he will have just as much freedom to act as always. And if he doesn't forget Aratha's kindness, he is sure to become a strong ally someday. 3 people had expressed their disagreement with issuing Eugene an entry pass to Akron: the Blue Tower Master, the Green Tower Master, and the head of the Wizards Guild. However, as the discussion progressed, they couldn't help but be persuaded little by little. That was just how extraordinary the genius that Eugene had shown them was. They couldn't help but feel pure curiosity. Even though he had only been practicing magic for a few months, he was already that amazing. So if he were introduced to the astounding magic in Akron, just how far could he develop his own magic? If he wasn't limited to self-study and received guidance in magic from a proper teacher. I've heard that he also showed overwhelming results in the bloodline continuation ceremony 4 years ago, Balzac mentioned as he stared at the closed door to the room. Even the Lionheart's direct line was forced to recognize his talent. If he receives Aratha's support on top of that, we might even be able to say that we contributed to the second coming of the Great Vermouth. The Green Tower Master unconsciously released a chuckle at these words. The second coming of the Great Vermouth? He felt amused that the one who said this was the Black Tower Master. Eventually, the Green Tower Master commented, "I can't help but feel that you're far too generous with your compliments." Balzac Ludbeth, are those words truly yours? What do you mean by that? Balzac asked. I'm talking about the Demon King of Incarceration who you've contracted yourself to. I only wanted to know whether his influence is coloring your words, the Green Tower Master explained. Balzac burst out laughing as he lowered his glasses. The Demon King of Incarceration is far too busy with Helmuth's affairs. Furthermore, if I was really trying to convey the will of the Demon King of Incarceration, I wouldn't have made my argument in such a fashion. I would have pushed even harder and more forcefully. Forcefully, the Green Tower Master's eyes cooled considerably. It wasn't just the Green Tower Master who showed such a reaction. Balzac just let the hostility sent in his direction flow over him as he shrugged and said, I'm sorry if my words sounded offensive, but the weight that the will of the Demon King has on me is far more absolute than anything else. Don't think that lets you off the hook, the White Tower Master said with a snort as she got up. In any case, it doesn't feel like we'll be able to achieve complete unanimity with our differing opinions. So instead, why don't we leave it up to a majority vote? Because the longer that our argument goes on, the more bored that kid waiting outside will get. That would be for the better, Honian agreed with a smile. I am in favor of issuing Eugene Lionheart with a permit to enter Akron,